What's up, y'all? My name is Devontae, and I sacrifice my time so you don't have to. Can you guys do me a favor? I want you guys to come with me, revisit a time, an olden time, if you will, prehistoric times in regards to talking about the internet. That old-fashioned year called 2021, where the land was free and the home was brave. Dinosaurs, they roamed the earth, scavenging for cavemen who are defenseless, fighting back with said dinosaurs, making them out of purses and meat. None of that actually occurred, I know, but I dropped out of daycare, so bear with me. But during that timeline, something extravagant happened, something earth-shattering, something that blew everyone's mind. Joe Rogan had a podcast with The Undertaker on it. And Undertaker, that deviant The Undertaker, he says some very, very mean, callous, dare I say mean, Mark Callous, God, I was fucking cringe, things about the wrestling business that pertains to the wrestlers, and it hurt their feelings. And even some of the fans who identify with some of those wrestlers, because, hey, in the end of the day, they like to linger on to whatever they feel can make them feel better about themselves. So do me a favor and let's go back to the year 2021, and I'm going to read an article for you. January 23rd, 2021. Undertaker gets intense backlash for calling WWE's product soft. The legendary wrestler conducted a rare album. Oh, actually, I should probably let you guys know. This link is down in the description box below if you want to follow along. All right. The legendary wrestler conducted a rare, albeit increasingly common, post-retirement interview with the popular podcast this week. The long-form interview spanned his illustrious career, but the big takeaway among the wrestling community was a sharp criticism directed at WWE's locker room today's. And what is typical for a wrestler from a previous generation, Undertaker lamented the current generation in comparison to his own, correctly predicting his comments would piss a lot of people off. And I quote, I try to watch the current product. It's tough right now for me, Taker said. The product has changed so much and it's kind of off. I'll probably piss a lot of people off, but they need to hear it. It is what it is. To the young guys who think he's a bitter old guy, I'm not bitter. I did my time. I walked away when I wanted to walk away. And can I just insert also just a little bit of a pause for people who like to call it The Undertaker bitter? He's one of the biggest wrestlers of all time. If he came back right now, he got probably the biggest pop out of any superstar that's currently relevant at the moment. And yeah, he still makes a shit ton of money. Don't understand where the bitter part comes from. Just throwing it out there. Continuing on though, I just think the product is a little soft. There's guys here and there there's guys here and there that have an edge to them, but there's too much pretty and not enough substance, I think, right now. One of the big things that happened was that the generation before, we all got old at the same time, so there weren't enough guys to work with the young guys, Undertaker continued. The Undertaker went on to lament the toughness of the current locker room compared to the rough around the edges wrestlers who came up with. And I quote, that era guys too, those were men. You go into a dressing room nowadays, it's a lot different. I remember walking into my first real dressing room, and all I saw were some crusty fucking men, right? Half of them had guns and knives in their bags. Shit got handled back then, you know? Now you walk in, there's guys playing video games and fucking making sure they look pretty. It's evolution, I guess. I don't know what it is, but I just prefer when men were men. Taker's comments did not sit well with the current generation of talent, some of whom publicly disagreed with the future WWE Hall of Famer in one way or another. And I quote from Drew McIntyre, I don't agree whatsoever. This is him talking to Sports Skeetum. especially from an in-ring perspective, which, by the way, you just completely proved the Undertaker right, just going directly to the in-ring perspective, as if that was Undertaker's point. But I digress, though. Again, this was 3 years ago, so Drew McIntyre was a little bitty baby. Again, he was roaming the lands of dinosaurs, so he didn't have any common sense back then. Especially from an in-ring perspective, I've listened to part of it. I've got to listen to the whole thing. It's pretty new. But I think he may have been referring to like the kind of storylines and characters. And I think he's referring to the environment that, influences said storylines and characters. Yeah, you completely missed his point. Xavier Woods, I remember him talking. This was actually super duper funny because he completely missed the entire point. Xavier Woods said back then, "I wouldn't be the person that I am without the guidance and lessons of a few key people from the previous generation of wrestling. They taught me about the business, to save my money, and that having video games in the locker room is healthier than having guns. Thank you, guys." Yeah, this is coming from the same guy that legitimately ran a train on Page, at this point, 4 years prior? Overall, now 7 years prior, but at that time, 4 years prior, at least when the videos leaked in itself. So yeah, definitely healthy locker room right there, am I right? Video games, indoctrinating you to gang bang one of your employees. Yeah, totally. That's fine. Totally, completely understand. Good job, Austin Creed. You're the greatest. Bruiser Brody got murdered because of the type of locker room the Undertaker wishes was still around. Well, I mean, honestly, if Bruiser Brody had his gun on him, if the Undertaker was actually saying that the man back in those days had, probably still be alive right now. So that's kind of ironic, actually. Not to mention he was, murdered because Bruiser Brody was, people don't want to admit that, but he was kind of a dick. But sure, whatever feeds your narrative. I'm pretty sure Bruiser Brody, not this, take away anything from what was it Carlos Colon? I think that I don't know, was it Carlos? I don't think it was Carlos Colon. No, I can't remember the actual story in itself as far as who was the perpetrator. I know Abby was there, right? I know Carlos Colon, that was his promotion, if I'm not mistaken. I think Tony Atlas said he was actually there too, but from my understanding, I think it was actually instigated because Bruiser Brody got really, really uppity and wanted to beat the guy's ass. The guy stabbed him in the showers. I can't remember the story exactly, but that's how it actually went down. It wasn't a locker room issue. It was, can we sit down and talk this out? No, I'd rather beat the shit out of you type of issue. Just saying, The Undertaker does raise some valid points in regard to his generation, all moving on at the same time at the expense of the next generation. Though his criticisms aren't without their holes, for example, in talking about the Attitude Era aging out, therefore not having the opportunity to work with today's talent, these comments appear to ignore the generation that came right after him. Yeah, but those guys were just as lost also. I got a friend from Fightful. He coined the term. I want to make a video about that one of these days too. I think I talked about this beforehand. He calls them the lost generation. The generation that none of the fans actually, holds into belief, if you will. It's like that latter portion of Ruthless Aggression era. Like the guys like The Miz or Kofi Kingston or John Morrison or Jack Swagger or Sheamus, Ken Kennedy, MVP. Those guys like Carlito. Those guys, they're like the lost generation. I mean, yeah, there was a generation buffer in between the Attitude Era and what we have today, or at least at that time. But those guys were just as lost and confused and didn't really know what the fuck to do because, the guidance, like you said, the guidance in itself was rapidly decreasing as far as guys who actually were fucking over and knew what the fuck they were doing in the business. I'm just saying, you might want to focus on that also aspect. There's a reason why he skips directly over that because those guys, not really what we would call notable in the business. Probably one might even say or be inclined to say that they were part of the reason why the business started to decline. Whether you like them or not, that just happens to be the case. Other metrics also, but it was those guys in that position. Same can be said about a John Cena. But I digress though. But yeah, I just wanted to read this for you guys just to kind of come back, revisit some things that the Undertaker said about 3 years ago around this time, and do a little bit of a evaluation of the current landscape 3 years later after you made those famous comments. Some may say infamous, but that's because your mom doesn't love you, and that's fine. I feel bad for you. Did Undertaker's words hold any truth in comparison to what we see currently at the moment since that time when he actually made those comments. Now, I do want to be a little bit good faith, and I do want to say that if I remember correctly, in fact, I think I made a video on this, the Undertaker did walk back what he said. I'll leave a link down in the description box below if you want to go watch that video I made about 2 or 3 months ago discussing all this. But the Undertaker did walk some of his remarks back, and I feel like he only did it just so like he can have a little bit of goodwill with the rest of the locker room, because he is now starting to enter an ambassador role. And I don't know if this is true, but something tells me that Undertaker does have an influential position within the company as far as business is considered. I know no one outwardly like admit it, for an example, but I do believe that Undertaker holds a lot of weight, and I feel like he has to have better communication with the wrestlers. So why go out of your way to alienate yourself from the audience from the wrestlers for no apparent reason? That's why I feel like he actually walked those comments back. But again, it could be something else. Maybe he actually did change his mind. Who knows? But I do want to say that all the things that have happened since 2021 coming up to now that kind of, defeats the Undertaker's point. Yeah, I would definitely be the first person to admit that, certain things like locker room etiquette, or certain things like guys not getting their asses beat backstage and stuff like that, and, fights happening backstage. I mean, I'll be the first person to admit that the Undertaker was wrong about, oh, wait, no, AEW kind of defeats that point like a million times past the point of what the Undertaker was talking about. I mean, do we have to talk about the 1,000,001 fight Sammy Guevara got into? Andrade, yeah, Eddie Kingston, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, CM Punk, Jungle Boy. Yeah, see, that kind of defeats your point right there. Wrestlers, such a safe environment with video games, right? Yeah, that's not the case, That's not really the case from what I'm seeing. Seems like a bunch of soft-ass wrestlers are still around, and it seems like the way that they usually communicate with the other wrestlers is by fighting them, which is nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that, but for you to actually want to push that narrative that, oh, well, everything is currently good backstage with the lack of this, that, and the third that the Undertaker was just, advocating for, which he didn't, by the way. That was literally just him symbolizing what was going on at that point in time, to essentially say that they were men back then, and that today you lack a bunch of men in the locker room. And with that type of upbringing, and then you combine that with the social media aspect, and then you still get the same problems, but it's now these problems coinciding with the fact that a bunch of your wrestlers, in comparison to yesteryear's wrestlers, are a bunch of pussies. It's kind of hard to say, you know what I mean? I find it funny, and I do want to bring this up too, how the Undertaker brings up something along the lines of, oh, we had guns back then, yada, 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 and we carried ourselves well, and nothing really happened. Well, can I ask you guys a question? You could probably say, like, oh, Devontae, well, there's no social media or no internet back then. Well, you did have Dave Meltzer to talk about certain things. With the exception of Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, can you name me another point in time, in particular looking at the 90s, that a lot of things really broke out in comparison to what you see nowadays? I have a legitimate channel that talks about professional wrestling every other week with some nonsense happening backstage. You can literally look through my catalog. If you have my Millennial Smart channel, I will tell you, I had over 1,300 videos at the time. 1/3, maybe even 2/3 of my videos were all drama-related videos. You can look at my channel right now. I just created this channel in September, October, November, December, January. It's been 4 months since I made this channel. 4 months. And almost pretty much 3/4 of my entire catalog on this channel in particular are filled with drama. Would you like to tell me how much drama was filled back in, let's just say, in particular, the 90s? Can you tell me? I don't think you can. You could probably name a couple of things. You could probably name a couple of things. I guarantee you can. But in comparison to what we have today, I don't think you can do it. And at least the things that happened back in those days, there was a reason why they happened that had to deal with, say, money or something along the lines of that, or respect, or, power imbalance. Not to say that I necessarily agree with their actions, but in comparison to nowadays, where you have guys who are fighting because the communication backstage of whether or not a guy should go out in the ring and actually do his choreographed fucking bullshit finish versus a guy going out there and actually having a legitimate finish that doesn't have a bunch of bullshit attached to it to easily progress through whatever match or whatever story that's going on at that moment to, get over the angle, because that's what matters at the end of the day. We have now an attitude in professional wrestling that existed back then, but at least there was a basic foundation. Like, you look back in the 1990s, for example, and yeah, you had this whole new generation art going on in WWE and all the so-called old guys, which I find fucking ironic considering all those guys back in the days that were pushed out for the new generation to come in are probably 10 years younger than the wrestlers currently at the top of professional wrestling today. The same ones who every fucking week are breaking somebody apart in their damn body. Super ironic how that usually works, right? It's like they had that implemented for a reason. But I do want to take the time to look at the guys back then who at least had the basic mindset, even though they weren't as athletic, because that was pretty much the contention back in the days, was there are too many old, big, muscle, steroid guys who are in the main event scene, right? But notice how the guys who were actually saying that are like probably twice as big as the people that you see today, and they don't take steroids, at least not to my acknowledgement at the time when the, steroid stuff went away. The guys like a Shawn Michaels or Bret Hart, not to say that they never did take steroids. I'm not going to sit there and say you're pretty stupid and pretend they probably didn't, but considering that we're looking at 93 to 96 when that shit was really, 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 really bogged down on, I do find it funny how these two guys are probably twice the size as the wrestlers today, and they're probably considered midgets back in, say, 1994, right? But that was the biggest contention back in the days, was essentially small guys versus big guys going into the main event scene. Today, the whole contention is whether or not a character is deservingly to be put over, or logic, or anything in regards to pomp and circumstances being put over directly the in-ring perspective. As if the in-ring perspective is the only credibility that it's, needed in order to get a professional wrestling company over. Not to mention we have a bunch of marks, and I'll throw myself into that in the end of the day, at least on the opposite side of the spectrum, but a mark is a mark nonetheless, who feel they could speak on behalf of the wrestlers and they know a lot more than the wrestlers in the end of the day, and that their tribalist belief and their tribalist perspective kind of lingers into almost like a parasocial relationship, in that they can speak for said wrestling company or said wrestler, and then that wrestler feels the need to have to oblige by whatever that fan is actually believing or that group of fans is believing, and they play into that versus the old school mentality of doing whatever you need to do to get the business over right then and there. You know what I mean? So I look at what The Undertaker said about 3 years ago, and it seems like the professional wrestling business not only got worse, but it got worse even with the metrics that the wrestlers were arguing against The Undertaker having in place right now, not doing anything to deter any of those actions today. Now, again, it's not to say that the professional wrestling locker rooms or the environment in the business today isn't as healthy or even more healthier than what it was about 20 years ago. That'd be retarded to say that's not the case. Obviously, with the deaths and the beers and the bullying and all that stuff, that fucking sucks, obviously. But fundamentally, what The Undertaker was talking about in regards to not focusing on your video games influencing what the fuck you're going to do in the match, and, sitting back and playing some dominoes, smoking some weed, probably, throwing some spades down on the table and then going over your match and, hey, man, we're going to go to this town. What's the route that we can take to get to this? It built up a better camaraderie, as far as, what is probably needed in order to help your body out a little bit more. Like, hey, watch my back, brother. I don't want to do this spot tonight. Or, hey, we need to focus more on this so we don't have to hurt our bodies in order to get this over. And that usually came over a game of bones on the table. I think that's what The Undertaker was mainly aiming at. And what people have in video games nowadays, and 9 times out of 10 probably looking at these video games and seeing a new DLC move and saying, wow, what if we try to do that in our match? And then that becomes the norm, and then some idiot tries to pull it off and then breaks their leg. And not to mention the older generation who wants to keep up with these new kids nowadays who probably grew up in the beginning of that video game stuff, probably wants to emulate that and keep up with these young kids, and then you get injuries left and right, like what you're seeing right now with a CM Punk or a Seth Rollins. Yeah, it's pretty clear to tell what the Undertaker was alluding to and why he's absolutely fucking correct. Absolutely. And it's not to advocate for a position, because I don't think Undertaker would advocate for a position of people, for an example, wrestling with concussions or all this other kind of stuff. No one is saying that. But notice how, like, the injuries back then were few and far in between. Whenever you heard about an injury that a WWE superstar or a WCW superstar, it was a lingering effect that happened a couple of years, maybe even a decade prior, and it was just lingering on because they never took the opportunity to get surgery. Yeah, that right there is a bad mentality. Go get it fixed. That's what I was saying about an MJF and his injuries, right? But the wrestlers today who are getting injured, they're getting injured, coming back and getting immediately injured once again. Again, you can look at someone like a CM Punk. You can look at someone like that Cora Jade chick from NXT. You can look at someone like Charlotte Flair. She wasn't too far removed from her last injury previously prior to this. You know, you look at the AEW roster. Look at Wardlow, for an example. A guy who's about to get a re-push who probably fucked up his knee, right? You have guys doing front flip dives like DLC moves from your most recent wrestling game who are crushing people's throats because they don't know what the fuck they're doing, right? And you say to yourself, Devontae, mistakes happen, accidents happen. Yeah, but you're doing these accidents and these mistakes that can, be prone to happen more accordingly and easily because you keep doing it on a consistent basis rather than focusing on the character aspect, rather than focusing on the angle aspect where it doesn't put your body into a position have to do these kind of things all the time to appease these wrestling fans who are now sitting here and having this, again, parasocial relationship with you, let you know that what you're doing in the ring is a good thing. That's what I'm saying. The wrestlers back then, and this is what brings everything into one little bubble what the Undertaker we're talking about 3 years ago, and not only is it now indicative of what the product is today, never mind all the social media aspects that come along with the news that influences a character or why not you should be pertaining or trying to allude to whatever storyline that you feel that would be good in order to get said superstar more over or whatever the case may be. It all comes back down to whether or not you know what you're doing as a wrestler. Dutch Mantel said this 1,000,000,001 times, and it's one of his best sayings and one of the best sayings of professional wrestling history. He liked it better when the marks were in the seats and not in the ring. And that's what the Undertaker is essentially alluding to when it's all said and done. 3 years later, and the Undertaker is not only being proven right, but even worse, even with the things put in place that the wrestlers want to defend about 3 years ago, it seems like it's even worse, even with those things still implemented. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. As always, my name is Devontae, and I'll be catching you guys later. We can do some more of these revisits if you guys want to also. Just drop something down in the comment section below, and I'll call you retarded if I don't want to do it. Deuces, P. Eyes.